And people pleasing for me was so hard. I couldn't set boundaries for my clients. I wanted them to like me. I wanted to give in on everything they said. I was not authentic with them.
Welcome to the Free Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Miles.
Hey everybody, glad you could join me today. Have a really important topic today, so let's get into it. You know, as a kid wearing really thick glasses and carrying extra weight, in fact, a lot of extra weight, I was the smartest in my class, but I was such an easy target for bullies. They called me names like Arnold and Pugsley, and that experience affected me. It drove me to perfectionism. I actually graduated #1 in my high school, college, and law school classes. But 4 decades and many trials later, I still battled self-doubt, despite winning a series of cases representing trucking companies. And today I want to talk about how our past shapes our present, how it affects our legal career, and how breaking free from these invisible prisons can transform not just your practice, but your life. I'm Gary Miles, and this is The Free Lawyer. You know, our past affects us in so many ways, and worse than that, it affects us without us knowing it. We're often so unaware of the impact of our past on us and what it does to us and how it changes how we react to circumstances in our life. They really are invisible frameworks that affect our professional decisions and usually affect them in ways that aren't helpful. So, I explained a little bit in the intro. I was very heavy as a kid, very fat. I wore nerdy glasses. I was a goody two-shoes. I was a brown noser. I was smart. None of those things made me cool. And I was bullied, called names, made fun of. I had some friends, I had some loyal friends, but in the scheme of things, I was really picked on. And what that led in me to is a lot of perfectionism, a lot of people pleasing, and a lot of self-doubt. I had to overcome those times when I was picked on by proving myself that I was the best and by trying to win your approval. It was important to me that you like me. So I became a chameleon. I would act how I thought I should act to gain your approval and act how the other person thought I should act to gain that person's approval. And they might have been very different. And I really was blessed to have a lot of success. I had a really good track record in trying my cases. I did quite well. I was never short for work to do, managed my own firm, but I didn't believe in myself. I had incredible self-doubt. And I'll suggest that all those things I struggled with, the self-doubt, the perfectionism, the people-pleasing, they were in many ways a direct result of my childhood experiences. And we all have different childhood experiences, and so many of them are wonderful. And I had wonderful childhood experiences, but the ones that we remember, the ones that affect us, are the ones that are not so wonderful. The ones that cause us pain, that give us some negative feeling or emotion. And, I've learned from life that all of those things can be managed, can be overcome. So for example, for me with the perfectionism, I would prepare excessively out of fear because I had to be the best. And I was so afraid of losing because that would put me back to where I was a loser in air quotes as a kid, where I was picked on, where no one liked me. And so I would prepare excessively. I'd be so committed to winning, to being the best, to getting the verdict my way. And it carried me into perfectionism. And I learned that excellence is what matters, not being perfect. All that matters is being the best you can be that day. That's what counts. And, striving for excellence, striving for managing your own challenges, perfectionism, whatever they might be, is all that matters. And people pleasing for me was so hard. I couldn't set boundaries for my clients. I wanted them to like me. I wanted to give in on everything they said. I was not authentic with them because I wanted them to like me. I wanted them to say yes. I wanted them to use me in more cases. And what I've learned in life is, what you focus on is what happens. When you focus on what you don't want, it creates self-fulfilling prophecies. When I played golf and I had it over the lake and I said, I might hit that in the lake. I was more likely to hit in the lake, but when I looked at the pin on the other side of the lake and I dreamed of hitting that, hitting next to the pin, I was more likely to have a good shot. So I'm going to suggest that one thing I would like you all to try to do is to identify your own patterns, your own experiences, things from your past that affect you today, and how you respond to present situations today that may be a result of your past. So I'm going to give you actually 15 or 16 questions for you to think about and see how they affect you today. So here they go. When you receive criticism about your work, what is your immediate emotional reaction? Does it remind you of experiences from your past? Think about a recent difficult client interaction. Somewhere where your client challenged you, wouldn't accept your settlement advice, or got angry about when something was done. What emotions came up for you? And can you trace those feelings back to earlier experiences in your life? When you win a case or when you achieve success, do you fully celebrate it? Or do you immediately start worrying about maintaining that standard and having expected it? And how comfortable are you in saying no to clients or colleagues or your partner? If it's difficult, what past experiences might be driving that discomfort? And let's talk about your limiting beliefs. What's the story you tell yourself when you face a challenging case? Is it, I can handle this? Or is it something more limiting like, I'm not experienced enough? What do you believe you must do to be a good attorney? And where do those expectations come from? If you could completely release your fear of judgment, how would your practice of law change tomorrow? And what professional situation makes you most uncomfortable? What message from your past might be triggering that response? Let's talk about perfectionism. How often do you delay submitting work because it doesn't feel perfect yet? And when preparing for a trial or a hearing, do you have a clear sense that, this is enough preparation? Or do you always need to look at it again because you feel like it's not quite been sufficient? And when you make a mistake, how do you respond? Is your self-talk compassionate or is it punishing? And what would happen if you aim for excellence instead of perfection in your next case? Let's talk about people pleasing. When was the last time you stated an unpopular opinion in a professional setting, and how did it feel? How often do you take on extra work that you don't really want to do to avoid disappointing others, even when it's not in your best interest? Do you ever find yourself apologizing for things that aren't actually your fault? I don't know how many times in my life I said, I'm sorry, even when it wasn't my fault. And client relationships, is it difficult for you to set and maintain boundaries? So I want to talk to you about a process, and a process begins with your self-awareness. And it also begins reflecting on your past experiences and how they show you're competent. I remember my first trial, it was in the 80s, against an inflammatory, highly successful plaintiff's attorney in Baltimore City, loved by all the judges. He did the craziest things, all of them inappropriate, and he got away with all of them. And I was scared to death. It was my first solo case. And I made 7 motions for mistrial. Every one was denied, but I ended up winning the case. And I learned from that it doesn't matter how great he is. We put our pants on the same way. We're both competent attorneys. And that reminds me of very early in my career. I was in a county near Baltimore, and the dean of the bar there, who was a generation older than me, I kept calling him Mister. And he said, listen, Gary, I'm entitled to no more respect from you than you are from me. So you call me Hugh and I'll call you Gary. And don't ever forget that. And that meant a lot. It made me realize that I had value even against this so experienced lawyer. And many of you know I've been in recovery. And that's helped my growth in so many ways. I used to be consumed by fear. Fear ran my life. I was afraid of everything, even things that weren't scary. But I learned that, in life, everything will be okay. Everything will turn out how it is. And what I'm responsible for is my effort and my integrity today. And I learned also that I used to try to control everything, and now I don't have control over everything in life. I just have control over me, my feelings, my thoughts, my actions. I don't have control over the judge, the lawyer, my client, or the results. And I've learned the power of authenticity. People pleasing, I was so fake. It was crazy how fake I was. Because I wanted everyone to like me, and I tried to figure out what you wanted, and I tried to give it to you. But I've learned now I can just be myself. And most people will like that, but some people won't. And I've learned, the power of support from others. I had a classmate call me some years back. We had been friends and acquaintances for many years, but never really worked together. And he said he had a mold case. He wanted me to handle it. I said, Erwin, I don't know anything about mold case. He said, neither do I. That's why I don't want to do it. I said, well, let's do it together. It was amazing because I'm very organized and logical, and he could connect with the jury. We had so much fun working together, cheering each other up, rooting each other on, supporting each other. And we got a verdict that was triple what we sought in a settlement demand. So let's talk about how you can liberate yourself from your past. Let's begin by every morning thinking about what messages you might have gotten from your past and thinking about maybe they're not real. Maybe they're not really who you are. And try to reflect on some of your successes, some of your wins. I really like creating a wins journal where each day you write down things you did well, things that turned out well. May even be a loss, but a loss that you handled well. So spend time each morning just in reflection on who you are and what you're about. And think about some of those past stories that you tell yourself, and why don't you reframe them? Not to I'm not experienced enough, but I'm learning to be a good lawyer, or I may not be as good as that lawyer, to I'm very competent and I dedicate myself to my client. Change those stories about yourself and find support systems in our profession. Things like, regular lunch group where you meet with other lawyers that you're friends with. My two senior partners, both a generation older than I, they had a lunch group. They went out to lunch every day. It was about 6 or 7 of them. They wouldn't all come every day, but there were always several. And that was their daily thing, to have lunch together and give themselves support in that way. Find a mentor you can work with. Mentorship is so important to help free yourself from some of these past experiences. And then change how you see success for yourself. Don't judge success just by your billable hours or fees you've earned. Judge it by, have you shown up in a genuine way for your clients? Have you been honest and true to yourself and your values? Have you been authentic? And have you done your best to be a good lawyer for your clients? Because we judge ourselves by external standards, we're living someone else's life. What's important to you in your practice? And strive to attain that. The authenticity is so important. And, we as lawyers, we like to act like we have all the answers and we're really good and we know everything. But, it's okay to be vulnerable in the office. It's okay to be vulnerable with your client, to let them know, I'm not sure. Let me think about that. I'll get back to you. I have to research that question. I can't guarantee the result here. I'm not sure exactly what will happen. This is a tough case. There are some positives and some negatives. Now, remember, I tried this really difficult wrongful discharge case. It was actually a defamation case growing out of a discharge. And, we had a really tough case. And I let my client know this will be hard fought. They will be challenging. And I don't know what's going to happen. But what I do know is I'm going to fight for you. And that meant so much for her. And we got, a great result. And give yourself some praise. Accept yourself for your strengths and your weaknesses. Don't look for validation from other people. Look for it from inside yourself. If you go home tonight and you did a good job for your clients, be comfortable with that. That's what really counts. That's where your self-confidence comes from. And once you start being authentic and honest and excellent and relaxed and more comfortable, you know what's going to happen? It's going to spread through everyone you know. It's going to spread through others in your firm and your clients. They will see, the change in you. And the real freedom in practicing law is to practice it from a position of passion rather than obligation. Don't go to work because you have to. But you get to go to work. You get to practice law. You get to serve your clients. You get to answer their questions. We are firefighters. Somebody said to me, I feel like I'm always putting out fires. I said, that's right. We're firefighters. We're hired to put out the flames in someone else's life and help them get to the other side. And my final thought is practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself like you talk to your son or your daughter. Or if you had a really good friend in your firm who was struggling and came to you and was venting about how they were doubting themselves and were struggling. How would you speak to that person? You'd speak to them from a position of understanding and support and compassion. So speak to yourself that way. True liberation in practicing law isn't really about erasing your history, but it's about choosing how that history shapes your future. Your past experiences do not define your professional path. They inform it. I transformed from a bullied child to a successful attorney and now a mentor and coach to other lawyers by understanding which parts of my past to carry as wisdom and which ones I should release as limitations. Our clients deserve counsel who bring their authentic selves to their practice, and you deserve the freedom to practice law from genuine strength rather than some drive to please others or from some external validation. I'm Gary Miles, and I believe that breaking free from your past is the first step towards your becoming a truly free lawyer. Thank you for joining me here today. And as always, please be well, be safe, and be free.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Free Lawyer Podcast. Wherever you are listening, if you enjoyed what I shared, please leave me a rating and review. I would appreciate hearing more about what you like best and what topics you might like me to cover in future episodes. If you are interested in experiencing a more fulfilling and a more successful life, please contact me at www.garymiles.net, where you can schedule a free discovery call with me so I can learn more about you, your challenges, and your dreams. I appreciate each and every one of you and have a great rest of your day. Thanks to all of you for your support.